Botanical materials and conditioning techniques. So what do we need to do with our flowers once we get them? We bring them home from the market, the supermarket, hopefully a florist you've purchased them from. What do we need to do with them to make them look the best they can in the vase and last the most amount of time for you? So if you've purchased them from a florist, they should not have this plastic still on them. However, many times if you buy them from a supermarket or a market or a wholesaler perhaps, they'll keep the plastic on them. First thing we need to do is get that plastic off really quickly. It's very bad for the flowers as it makes them sweat, and that's not what we want them to do, as they will decline and not live quite the length of time that we would prefer. So we cut that plastic off as quickly as we can. And from here, we'll cut the tie, remove that, and this is where you need your gloves. So gloves come in very handy. You can use a towel as well, a hand towel. Gloves are great, saves your hands, and it's nice and soft and gentle on the stems of the flowers as well. So what we need to do is get the foliage off the bottom before it goes into the vase. It's the foliage in the water that makes the flowers go off so quickly. So it creates bacteria in the water, and they certainly don't like living in that. So we're going to remove the leaves with the gloves straight into the bin. Getting them all off. So you can imagine that's not terribly nice doing that with your hands. And removing any. Then with your snips, recutting the stem. Now if your flowers have been out of water for quite some time, you've had to travel or you did other shopping after you purchased the flowers, make sure you give them a really good chop. The shorter the length, the longer the flowers will last, because there's less stem that they have to drink from. So we'll cut these ones quite nice and short, always on an angle, so we get a bigger surface area there for the flowers to drink. The other reason why we want to cut them on an angle is so that if the stem sits flat on the base of the vase, it can't actually get any water up underneath for it to drink. So if it's on an angle, it's always going to get a nice drink. So recutting the stems on that angle and then placing into the vase. Always nice, beautiful, clean vase without bacteria in there. Here's a great tip for getting a longer life out of your Singapore orchids. They're already a great laster, but there is a little technique that you can use just to get that extra lifespan out of them. So you could expect 14 or more days out of the Singapore orchids, which is just great. So one of the first things that we need to do is have a dish ready with some nice warm tepid water. So not even lukewarm, it's just slightly cooler than that. We don't want to shock them with some really cold water. So we'll just get the dish nice and deeply filled. Now I'll just be doing 2 orchids, but you can actually do an entire bunch at a time. They usually come in bunches of 5s. So just take the Singapore orchid stem. Now it is best to recut the stem just before you do this technique. What this technique is for is to put moisture, as much moisture as we can, into these flower heads. But we may as well cut the stem at the same time, and the entire flower can get a really good drink, a really good soak by doing that. So we cut the stem always on an angle, and we just let the flower rest gently. We're not dunking it down, we don't want to push it down and shove it into the water. We just want to let it just lay, just nice gently rest, and it will absorb as much of that water as it needs. The reason why we do this is because Singapore orchids live in a really nice, beautiful, tropical, humid environment. So one that I certainly like to be in. And so they really collect all the moisture out of the air. So this is a really quick way that we can let that happen for them into particularly some of the cooler states that they're imported to. We would leave that there for anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes. For this purpose, I'll take the orchid stem out. Now we're always taking it out stem first. We want that water to drip off the stems, off the petals, so that the petals aren't too heavy. Then when we stand it up, we don't want any of those petals to drop off because they're too heavy. They do have quite weak little stems. Okay, so once we've done that, then it goes straight back into a vase with nice, clean, fresh water in it. So that way they've kept all their moisture. You can get the best life out of your orchids. Here's a great tip for those who love gerberas. You may have noticed gerberas at times can droop and they look very sad and they're looking right down to the ground, and that's because they actually have an air blockage. So it's a bit of a myth that the reason why florists wire gerberas is to prevent them from drooping that way. It's actually not the case, as you'll see a bit later on why we actually guide wire our gerberas. To prevent them from drooping and preventing that air blockage, there is a quick technique that we'll do right now, and that is called scalding the gerberas, or other people call it giving them a cup of tea, which is a bit nicer. So what you will need to do is cut the end of the stem, always on an angle so that we get a bigger surface area. Then it goes into boiling water for either 30 seconds, or if you're just doing one gerbera at a time, you can watch the air bubbles just gradually come out. And once the air bubbles disperse and have stopped, that means the air blockage has cleared, and so that's enough time. 30-second rule is easier if you're doing more than one stem, and then it just goes straight into the beautiful, clean, cold water. And there we are. Big question I get asked a lot is what to look for in our botanical materials to know that you're buying fresh, good produce. And I really liken it to food. When your fruit and vegetables are fresh, then they're going to be vivid in colour. So that's something that's really, really important to look for in your flowers as well. Also that they're not limp, so similar to celery really. Nice, crisp, firm stems of all the material, that's what you're looking for. And also that they've got a nice clean cut on the end. So if you actually turn the flowers upside down, have a look at the end of the stems, they should be quite clean cut, no browning on the edges. Also, we don't want to see any browning on the petals in particular, but also the foliage as well, in the leaves as well.